Chapter 1. Zephira. "Hey Zephira," someone whispered behind her. She knew without turning around that it was Noah. "What?" She turned slightly in her chair, still keeping her eyes on the whiteboard. Their English teacher was a hard nut, and didn't appreciate chatting. "Put your hand like this," Noah said, demonstrating by holding his left elbow with his right hand. She frowned but complied. He looked at her chest and nodded. Zephira wanted to ask him what he was on about, but just then Ms. Hardnut turned around and she quickly copied the last few sentences from the board. She had to wait 10 minutes to have her curiosity satisfied, when they were divided up in pairs. "What was that about?" she asked Noah. "I was doing the Sag Test," Noah said. Felicia, who was sitting behind them, looked horrified. She hunched in and tried to hide her boobs. "What's the Sag Test?" Zephira asked. "It's where you check how far a girl's boobs are sagging and yours aren't sagging at all." Noah looked at her chest and sighed wistfully. If it was anyone else staring at her chest, she'd be creeped out, but this was Noah. They'd been best friends since year 7. He was like the younger brother she had never had. "You're sick." Zephira smacked him in the chest. "How would you like it if I wanted to measure if your nutsack was drooping?" He leaned back in the chair and spread his legs. "Measure away." "No thanks." She looked away from his groin and flicked her hair. "I don't want to see that. It's disgusting." "You're going to see one eventually," Noah said, and closed his legs. "No, I won't. I've seen enough." "Really? When did you see one?" he demanded. At their first meeting during Year 7 camp, he'd asked her out in a roundabout way. The teachers had devised a cunning plan to ensure students remained sleeping in their cabins at night. Every night after dinner, they took students for a 1-hour trek on the unsealed country streets until their feet ached from the gravelly road and their thigh muscles twitched. Getting into bed was a relief. On their second night out, Noah broke away from his posse and stepped in beside Zephira. Noah was tall and gangly like a beanpole, looming over a head taller than her, and he'd shortened his strides to match hers. Her friend picked up on his signal and sped up, leaving them to walk alone. After 5 minutes of small talk, he'd finally worked up the courage to pose his question. "If a guy liked you and wanted to ask you out, would you say yes?" "Even if a guy liked me and I liked the guy who was asking me, I would say no because I'm not ready for a boyfriend," she'd said. "When are you going to be ready?" Noah had asked. Since starting high school, it had seemed all everyone did was pair up and make out at lunchtime. It was like they were desperate to hurtle through this rite of passage of having their first boyfriend-girlfriend, so she wasn't surprised by the question. "Maybe in year 10, she'd said. She'd thought a lot on the subject. In the end she decided being 16 years old was a good age to have your first boyfriend. She wasn't eager to jump into her first relationship. While she'd had crushes, all of them were on boys who were older than her. Boys her age all seemed slightly gross and unkempt. "Okay," Noah had said, and returned to his posse. After returning from camp, they drifted into friendship because they were in the same home group and both were outcasts. Noah was always slightly on the outside from the boys in his group, most of them viewed his height as a threat, and he drifted between hanging around with Zephira and playing downball with year 10 boys. She didn't make many friends. She was a bookworm who enjoyed her characters' inner lives more than those of her peers. Once the possibility of an attraction or a relationship was off the table, they could become friends with none of the usual boy-girl pheromones interfering. Since then they'd never returned to the subject of us as a couple, but lately things were becoming weird. "So when did you see a dick?" Noah demanded, bringing her back to the present. "Shush," she hissed, looking around. Felicia gave them another glare, but no one else seemed to have heard him. "I watched that doco the other night," she told Noah. You know, the one about the guy and his sexual identity? There had been a documentary on SBS that the entire school was buzzing about. This guy talked all about his sexual adventures. For the finale, he set up the camera and jumped out in front of it, stark naked, his flaccid penis wobbling about. She started laughing as she remembered. It was so hysterical the way it just wobbled there. She looked up, expecting to see a smile on Noah's face, but he was dead serious. That's what happens, Noah said. Dicks move about. No, they don't, she said. She'd read romance novels for years and all the penises mentioned were turgid. Yes, they do. They move. They're just like boobs. Soft and pliable. She looked at him, not sure whether he was having her on. What would you do if your boyfriend's dick did that? He demanded, offended. Would you laugh at him? I won't be having sex until I'm married, she said. Noah greeted her statement with stunned silence. What? You won't? Why not? He finally demanded when his voice returned. Because I want to be in love and know that it's for real, she said. He's going to be the only one. An unexpected gift that romance novels delivered was her resolve to remain a virgin until marriage. All the heroines in her romance novels were virgins, and while the heroes might dally with women of easy virtue, he would only marry a woman who was pure. Okay, he said. What about your husband? Would you laugh at your husband like that? He returned to the topic that had started this conversation, the dangling penis. I don't know. She shrugged. I thought you were going to have a boyfriend in year 10. Noah asked. Not anymore. I'm going to wait for my husband. But how can you be sure that he's the one for you if you don't have sex before marriage? I'll know, she said. She'd watched her mother's romantic misadventures and didn't see that there was anything to be gained by having sex before marriage. All of Mum's boyfriends seemed to change for the worst once she had sex with them. It was like once they realized she was in too deep and they could show their true nature. Zephira would not let that happen. If a man loved her enough to wait for marriage, that meant he loved her for more than just sex. Noah looked perplexed. Miss Hardnut called for attention. But do you expect your husband to be a virgin? He whispered. She shook her head. In all the romance novels, the hero wildly sowed his oats with different girls, and then when he met the heroine he settled for her, happy to be in a monogamous relationship for the rest of his life. I think a guy needs to experiment, she said. Oh good, Noah said. Anyway, it's probably best if one of you knows what to do in the bedroom. She gave him a dirty look. He turned to the board with a smirk.
Chapter 2. Noah. After school, Noah waited by the gate for Zephira. She saw him and smiled. They stepped in together, their routine as they lived close to each other. They reached the milk bar. I'm going to buy a chocolate milk, she said. Noah nodded and waited outside, leaning on the wall. He was